So yesterday I shared with you the demo of my new Portrait Brush Pack 2022, and today I will actually show you in detail how to use all the brushes in this complete guide to my Portrait Brush Pack. So you can get the brush pack that I launched yesterday at hazelong.com or in my Gumroad profile, where you can download any of the 3 versions depending on how much you want to contribute to me, my channel and my website. So if you purchase the premium brush pack, there will be a few additional files. So there will be a PDF and there will also be a Procreate file and a bonus tutorial. So that when you open the Procreate file, you can see the layers and you can see that there are 4 layers labeled out 1, 2, 3, 4. So today I'll actually show you how I complete all 4 layers with all my brushes, and you will get to see the function and what techniques you get to use for each of the brushes. So let's get started with the first sketch and shade layer. So before you do anything, turn on the reference layer, select it and then go to the actions button and export this as a JPEG, and then go back to the actions button, hit on the reference tab and then import this image itself so that you can refer to this image while you're painting. So to get started, turn off the reference layer and turn on the sketch and shade layer. Select the layer, tap on the N icon and lower the opacity down so that you can barely see the sketch. Okay, now make a layer above all the other layers. We'll be painting on this layer. Pick a dark color and test it out. The brushes that we'll be using on this layer is the sketch brush, the natural sketch brush and the crosshatch brush. So it's these 3 sketching brush. We will use the sketch brush first. Now test the size of your brush. It shouldn't be too thick. If it's too thick like this, you won't be able to tell where the nose begins or where it ends, and you'll find yourself hard to find the features after you have sketched. Alternatively, if it's too thin, then you lose some of the confidence in your sketch and you can barely see your sketch. So make sure that it's slightly thicker than what you need, and that would be enough. As you sketch, try to match the stroke thickness to the ones that you can see in the reference. This brush will automatically smooth out your curves for you, so even if you are having trouble drawing a curve, it will help you a little bit. Your strokes will also be thicker if you press harder, so if you press lightly, you can find that it's slightly more transparent and it's also thinner in the line. This brush is also very good for feathering if you need to go over the stroke multiple times to get the thickness that you want. And it can also fill in small areas quickly and precisely. And because this brush can really help smooth your curves out, don't be afraid to do long sweeping lines or curves like this. You can also tilt your brush to do some minor shading with this brush, but this brush is not designed to do shading, even though you can do a little bit of it. So you can see that it's a bit patchy if I try to tilt my pencil and fill in the eyes here. And the way that you hold your pencil matters. So you see here I'm shading from the top of the screen, and it's definitely not suitable for filling in large areas when you tilt your brush. So if you find yourself using this brush to fill in areas like this, you can still clean it up using the smudge tool. Load the flat brush smudge into your smudge tool to clean up your shading. All in all, this brush is definitely just designed to do sketching and slight shading. Now let's try the natural sketch brush. You have to adjust the size of this brush because it's quite large, so make it smaller to match the reference below. This brush is also designed for sketching, so it's good for sketching, and if you tilt your brush, you can have feathery strokes that is very nice. You also find that this brush does not smooth out your curves as much as the other one, and if you fill in small areas, you can see that there is a natural grain to it. So each time you tilt your brush, you get a thicker and a faded, more grainy line. But if you increase the size of your brush and start coloring, you can see that the strokes gets more and more grainy until it almost disappears. And this makes it look a lot more natural when you're using it to shade. So for this session itself, you can actually use this brush alone to create all the shading and all the sketching. Just remember to adjust the brush size when you shade, because if it's too small, your shading can look like they have a lot of strokes and it will look quite messy. So these 2 brushes are the most complex because they have to do everything from sketching to shading to doing detailing and also to do coloring in the early stages of a portrait and also in the later stages where you are doing the finishing and details. So they are both very important brushes for you to master. Next, we'll look at the cross-hatching brush. This is a brush that is convenient to have if you like to do cross-hatching because it immediately lays down lines for you. So you can use it to gradually build up cross-hatching as you work. And then after that, you can use any of the sketch brush to detail the cross-hatching and to add outlines. Other than using this brush in the early stages of sketching, you can also use this for the later stages to add effects. So you can continue practicing your sketching with all the sketching brush in this layer, and once you're done, you can move on to the second layer to practice. The second layer is called the grayscale to color layer. So in this layer, we will actually learn how to color the grayscale layer into a complete portrait using just one brush. So this technique is very important because sometimes you start with a sketch and then you proceed to painting them in black and white or in a monochrome layer. Then after that, if you want to turn them into color, it'll be very difficult because you do not know how to do it. So there's actually just this one special brush that you can use to turn any monochrome painting or black and white painting or even the black and white photo, or you can even recolor any of your old portraits with just this one brush. For the second demo, turn off the sketch and shade, turn on number 2, grayscale to color, and then we are going to duplicate this layer and work on the duplicated layer so that we don't mess up the original one. Rename it something else so that you know what it is. Now lock the alpha for this layer, and then for the brush, we're going to use this one brush only, which is called Change Color Only. So for the color palette, we'll be using the easy skin tone color palette that you can get from my website. Drag it out and drag it to one side so you can use it at any time. Now I'm going to pick the color that is closest to her base color. I'm painting the entire portrait, but I feel that this color is too strong, so I'm going to pick gray. And then I'm going to paint the entire portrait again, but this time I'm using a light touch. So this will slightly gray out the portrait a little bit. Once the base is done and close to her base color, I'm going to pick red. I'm going to go to the selection tool and go to save and load. I've saved a couple of selections here for you guys already. So this one is going to be the face, the second one, and the one on the top is going to be neck, and the lower one will be the finger. So we'll select the face first and work on this. So once you selected the face and paint, you can see that anything that we do is going to be confined to the face only, which is good. So we're going to start by painting red lightly with a light touch on the cheeks and the nose. Then we are also going to paint her lips red. Be sure to use a very light touch when you're using this brush, because if you press hard, the color will be very strong. So if you press lightly, the color is a lot more subtle, and this is what we want to do when we are working on recoloring the portrait. So how this brush works is we are actually just changing the color of the painting, of the layer, instead of changing the value. So we are retaining the values but only changing the color. So we can use this technique to quickly change colors, test new colors, and also to recolor any portrait or painting or even a photograph. This is such an important skill to have, because if we break down the portrait into distinct steps like sketching first and then moving on to a grey painting, then only coloring it, this will actually reduce the amount of mistakes that we make. So this brush actually helps you to achieve that if you are new to portrait painting and you are starting from sketch to grayscale to color. Because value is so important in achieving realism in our portrait, it's always very important to start with a grey painting first if you're starting out. And then when you apply the color, you always start with an orangey brown, moving to red, and then after that putting in orange again, which is the third step. That is the step that I'm currently on. You can just use this easy skin tone palette that is readily available in my website to recolor any portrait. It is so versatile because there's so many colors in there, and is suitable for the highlight colors and to the base color and the shadow colors itself. Now to begin detailing with this brush, we are picking the red to recolor the eyebrows. You really need to be very careful with your brush size. It needs to be exactly the same size as your brows. Now we're going to pick the light pink and paint the tear ducts pink. We are also going to paint the corners of the eyes because they always appear more red. Now we're going to do the eyes white by picking gray and painting the whites of the eyes. Then we're going to pick a nice blue and fill in the iris for the eyes. And we can also add in some other colors to give more variety to the colors in the eyes. Now we're going to work on the highlights. Because the highlights are no longer gray, they are brown, they don't pop. So we need to apply gray to them or some sort of a blue. Sometimes yellow would work. You have to experiment, so we'll just paint over these areas. But the safe color will always be blue, so we can use blue to lightly recolor the soft highlights on her face like this. You can also take it one step further and color the sides of her nose a little bit more blue. For the lips highlights, I can usually use blue or a slight purple color, but blue usually works fine for most portrait highlights. So now we're going to pick the selection for the neck and work on the neck. So the neck would be the top one. And then once you have selected the neck, you can just recolor it with the dark red here and make it really pop red. Then we're going to change the selection again and go to the selection for the hands. And then now we're going to work on the hands. So I'm immediately picking pink and coloring the tips of the fingers pink. So I'm using a very light touch. I don't want to go too heavy on this so that it's not that apparent. And I also want to go over the shadow areas lightly. So I would reduce my brush size to match the size of the shadows. It's very important. Then we will pick the pale orange to warm up the shadows for all the fingers. For the nails, I'm picking this very bright pale pink to recolor the nails, so I'm matching the brush size once more, and you can see that it instantly almost grayed out the nails. So as you know, color has three properties, which is color, and then the grayness of it, and also value, which is the light and dark. So we know that this brush does not change any value, so light and dark is not affected, but we are actually applying the color and also the grayness of the swatch that we are painting. So because the nails were so pale and gray, but a little bit pink, so that's the color that we get at the end of the day. Now I'm using the same pale pink to paint over the highlights for the fingers. So I'm gonna let you do the hair by yourself. So look at the photo and see the hair. You can pick the color that is close to the color in the photo and see if you can get the correct color when you paint over it. And also for the highlights of the hair, try and guess the color of it. Is it yellow or yellow gray, or is it actually green? So try a few different colors and see if you can guess the color and the grayness correctly. If you want to take the easy way out, you can always just pick the color from the reference window to change the colors this way. But you won't learn anything from that because you won't know how the color temperature changes. So it's better if you try and experiment with different colors from the easy skin tone palette to improve your understanding of your colors. Okay, now let's move on to the third tutorial. For this third layer is called Adjustment and Effects, where I will show you all the adjustment and effects brushes that are in this brush pack that will help you in painting your portrait. So all these effects and adjustment brushes are meant to help you to be more efficient and save time. But if you don't have them, you can always just sketch them out, but they will take a lot more time because you need to adjust colors, adjust intensity of the temperature or the brightness or the darkness of the value. So with the brushes here, you can save a lot of time because you're letting the brushes do most of the work for you. Okay, minasan, let's go ahead and turn on the third layer and make sure that the alpha lock is on. Let's duplicate that. And then for this layer, you will notice that the portrait is slightly more faded out so that we can test all the adjustment and effects on this layer. So the first brush that we'll be using is called the Ink Soft brush, and this brush acts like a marker, so it only can drop shadows. Every time you paint, the color will get darker and darker. So this brush is good for artists who started out using watercolors or markers because they usually work from light to dark, and every layer that they do is getting darker and darker. You should also use very bright colors when you're using these brushes so that you don't accidentally put in very harsh shadows, because if you actually apply too much pressure when you're painting, your brush stroke can be quite dark even though you're using a very light color. So the lighter the color that you use, the easier it is that you can control. So this Ink Soft brush is actually very soft and you can use it as somewhat like an airbrush to add shadows. Next, we're going to try the Ink Marker brush. So it's exactly the same thing as the Ink Soft brush. It adds shadows, but this is a tighter brush, so you can use this brush in smaller areas to add shadow details instead. Here I'm pressing really lightly, but if you press it hard, it can really look like a marker when you use it. Okay, the next brush is gonna be the highlight soft brush. So this is the opposite of the other brush. This will only lay highlights. So if you use a color that's too bright, it's gonna end up white. But the color that you use, if it's darker, you can see more color in it. Like now, if I'm using this dark red, it's coming out bright orange instead. So the darker the color it is, the more vibrant your highlights will be. So you can always experiment with the colors first. And this brush is very good for laying in big patches of highlights. So if you want to change the lighting, you can use this brush to change the lighting itself, just like this. Or you can use this brush to lay down soft highlights on the face, but this is a very blur brush, so it only can lay down soft highlights. But if you use the highlight square brush, it is a fairly sharp highlights brush that is only faded at one end, and you can use it to add like square highlights and also big patches of highlights as well. So I feel that this is a more natural brush to use if you're doing highlights. For tiny highlights, I usually use the highlights marker brush because this brush is fairly small and you can get into tiny areas for the eyes especially and the lips. So it's easier to add highlights using this brush if you're doing detailing. But it can also do big highlights as well if you know how to fade them off nicely. The next highlights brush is the highlight shimmer brush. So this is like a glitter brush. This brush is best used over existing highlights because you can have a base and it will look a lot more natural. And be sure not to press too hard because that would be a bit too harsh. So the next brush that we're going to look at is called the skin highlights brush. This is also the same. All the highlights brushes have a brightening effect, including this one, and this one lays highlights down in a skin texture, so it's a lot more natural when you're putting on highlights this way. And this brush shows up better when you're painting it over a darker background because then you can really see the texture of the skin showing. So if you're looking for natural highlights, use this brush over bare skin and this will give you the best natural looking result. But if you paint too long in one area, it can easily get very bright, so be sure to use a light touch when you're using this brush. Next, we're going to look at the stubble left and stubble right brushes. This is actually brushes meant for like moustache and beard. So when you have this brush, just try and test it the direction out first. You can see the direction is completely wrong, so I'll show you how to change it. Go to the shape source and then scroll down and find this circle. So just drag the circle and change the direction of the brush stroke, then the hairs will follow along, and if it's wrong you can just swap the direction again and see which one works out better. So now I'm going to paint the other side as well and test the direction and make sure that it's correct as well. So this works as a base for the stubble, so this is not meant to be a complete brush. So after this you can still detail with any sketch or hairbrush to add in even more hairs and define the shadows, the modeling, and also you can use this to add highlights as well. So just use the stubble brush just to serve as a base for your beard or your moustache. The last effects brush that we'll be looking at is the freckles texture brush. So this texture brush, you can use it on another layer. So once you have placed all the freckles with a brown color or an orange color, the color will always turn out darker. After that, you can use your eraser to erase unwanted freckles. Finally, let's look at the hair demo. So for the hair demo, I have like 4 hair brushes to show you, and each of these brushes are different and have different functions, so you get to practice all of them out on this layer itself. So to start with the hair tutorial, I've saved another layer for the reference for the hair. So just export it out as a JPEG and then load it into your reference window like this. And then after that, you can just turn it off and turn on the hair layer. So we'll be using these 4 brushes for the hair, and the first brush that we'll be using is the hair waves brush. Be sure to create a new layer above the hair layer so that you can do your painting on this layer. And now you can actually use the color swatches on top to pick colors from to paint the entire hair with your hairbrush. So basically the base of the hair is already done, and all you have to do is to add the hair waves into the hair. When painting hair, it's easier to paint from dark to light, so here I'm just using the dark brown first to paint in all the hairs with this color first, then after that I'll move to the next lighter color and the next lighter color. So this hairbrush is new, it can create natural loose waves like this, so it's perfect for curls that are very loose and natural. And it's easier to work on hairs that are below other hairs first, because after that you can always just use the eraser tool to erase away the overlapping hairs like this. Because the edges of the base of the hair is quite flat, we have to add more strands of hair using this brush around the hair edges so that they appear more natural. Continue to add hair using this color all the way until you have completed the whole head and there's no more hair of this color for you to add anymore. Once you are done adding all the hairs using this color, you can move on to the darkest color, which is the black. I usually do not start with the darkest color first because I don't want my whole head to look too black, so I always start like one step lighter ahead. Once you're done with this color, we're going to move on with the next brush, which is called the hair flat brush. So this brush is actually more suitable for straight hair, fringe, and also for highlights. So I'm going to pick the second lightest color and paint in all the highlight strands in our hair. So we're going to use this brush for highlights this time because our hair is curly and we don't have any straight hair here. When you're doing the highlights like this, you don't have to go the entire length of the hair. You only need to go over the areas of the highlights only, and that will be enough to show that that area has lighter hair instead of going through the entire length, which will really create a mess after that. When you're done with the highlights, we can then move on to the next brush, which is the hair fine brush. So this brush actually have very neat curls compared to the hair waves brush, which is a lot more natural and loose. So I usually like to use it if I'm painting a very neat hair, or if I'm painting brows, I can also use this brush. So this time I'm picking the lightest color and doing the final highlights for the entire head. So basically I'm demoing all the hairbrushs here on this head. You don't really need to use all four. You can just stick with one or two to do the entire head. It really depends on your preference on which brush that you like to use and which one you think gives you more control. But you should just try all of them out first and see which one you like. But there is one brush that is quite important to use, that is the hair round brush. So this hair brush, when you paint it thickly, you can actually use it as a highlights brush for hair. But if you use it thinly, you can actually use it for brows, for lashes, for strands of hair, for flyaways, and also for baby hair as well. So because I already have a lot of highlights here, I'm not going to put any highlights anymore. Instead, I'm going to put individual strands all over her head for the flyaways. And when you're doing this, remember to look at the reference and change color as needed in order to follow the colors in the reference itself. But also, if you find yourself spending too much time using this brush, it means that your base or the time that you spent using all the other hairbrush wasn't enough. So if you see here, my hair layer is done and it looks like this now with all the hairs on top of it. Okay guys, I hope you have learned a lot so far. So right now, I'm actually going to show you a sneak peek of the bonus tutorial. If you have noticed, I've shared about the sketching brushes, the hair brushes, the adjustment effects brushes, but I have not shared anything about the painting brushes. So the complete and full-length tutorial for these painting brushes will be included only in the premium pack of my brush pack. So if you're interested, just get the premium pack to have access to this Procreate file itself and also the bonus tutorial that covers in detail how to use the 3 painting brushes. But I can't just leave everyone who watches my channel in the dark about all these 3 brushes, so I'm gonna give a sneak peek and a teaser of what these 3 brushes can do, and you can also use this information to experiment yourself if you're not gonna get the premium pack. So for direct coloring, we'll be working in this group. So we'll be creating a new layer and then painting colors directly on this layer itself. And the brushes that we'll be using is these 3 brushes, the airbrush, paint and blend, and natural paint and blend. We'll start with the airbrush first, but these 3 brushes are all just for painting. So first we're gonna go just all around the face, leaving the center bright. Then we will shade the center of the nose and also the chin. And we can also begin to color the lips red, and also after that we can smudge the brows to have a hair texture. Then next we're gonna use the natural paint and blend brush. This is a coloring brush, but the more that you paint over it, the more grainy it will get, and you can also blend the edges as you are painting in one stroke. So this brush is pretty good for blending and adding details and shading for large areas. Then the last painting brush that we'll be using is called the Paint and Blend brush. So this brush is suitable for blending in tight areas and doing really detailed blending for small areas as well. For both of these blending brushes, when you press harder, the paint will go onto the surface of the canvas, but when you press lighter, instead of depositing paint, you will start to blend instead. So this is kind of good because it saves you time from switching tools to the smudge tool to the painting tool. So this will help you in saving time and it's very efficient that way. But these two brushes are not easy to learn how to use, so if you can try and spend some time to learn how to use this, or you can download the premium pack for the bonus tutorial where I'll include a complete tutorial on how to use these brushes, because these brushes are using the new Procreate 5 engine, and even I took some time to learn how to use these two brushes, but once I learned how to use them, I stopped switching over to the smudge tool as often and I became quicker in my workflow. So after the 3 brushes for painting and blending, I will actually switch back to some sketch brushes and some adjustment and effects brushes to lay down the hairs and the highlights and to finish up the texture of the face. So this will all be included in this tutorial in detail. But after you watch today's video, and also if you get the premium packs bonus video, you will be able to learn exactly how to use all the brushes in this brush pack. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. I know that I've taken a long time in launching this brush pack because the content were not easy to create, and I thank you for being so patient with me. And in the future, I'll be launching more portrait tutorials created using this brush pack or the watercolor brush pack that I've launched this year as well. So make sure you subscribe to my channel and leave a comment on what kind of portrait that you want to learn so that I can see what I can provide to everyone. And remember to comment and like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!